So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, Substance Use Prevention, a review of what it means and requires through the language of football. So Jeff Lee is going to introduce us to the main concept of prevention by using the language of football, so making it easier for us to understand. So we are very happy you are attending this webinar, and just a few indications about the webinar. As you know, interpretation for this webinar is available in Spanish, Russian, and Urdu. Please see the chat for a link to connect to the interpretation audio. And then you will have the possibility to submit questions to Jeff by typing them into the GoToWebinar control panel. You can decide to pose a question whenever you like during the presentation, and at the end, I will address your questions to Jeff, and we will collect them for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. A recording will also be available for this webinar, so it's on demand. If you like to have it, it will be available for you. And at the end of this webinar, you can also require a certificate of participation after 28 hours of the webinar. So these are just a few indications for our webinar today. And I would also like to introduce ISSUP. Many of you, I'm sure, know what ISSUP is a membership organization with over 27,000 members worldwide, working in the fields of substance use prevention, treatment, and recovery care. The aim of ISSUP is to connect the professionals, just like we are doing today, through networking, knowledge exchange, and training, sharing the very best in evidence-based, and this is what we are going to do today with Jeff in the prevention field. And if you're not done so already, please sign up to ISSUP website, take a look at it, and you can ask to be a member of ISSUP and get into all the benefits that come from being a member. The website, you will see, also has a wealth of resources and publications in training, in papers, scientific papers. You can really find a lot there. And about Jeff Lee, who's our speaker today at this webinar. Jeff Lee is a senior consultant to ISSUP, and really he brings a lot of expertise in the field and a lot of experience from working in the drug demand reduction field for almost 40 years. Currently, Jeff works within ISSUP and he focuses on scientific support to all elements of ISSUP's activities, including the promotion of evidence-based policy and practice within the field of drug prevention. So it is my pleasure to hand over to Jeff Lee, and I hope you all enjoy the webinar. The floor is yours, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Raquel. I'm not sure if anyone introduced Raquel. Raquel Danini, as many of you will know, is an expert herself and tremendous experience and expertise in the field of prevention. And I'm so glad she could introduce this session, and I hope help me with answering the questions because she is a real good colleague to work with. Having said that, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to those of you who have joined us for the second half of this webinar on substance use prevention, and my effort to try and offer it through a perspective of football, I hope timely given what's going on and the big match tonight between England and Wales, that we're trying to look at prevention through the language of football. And if you join me for the first half, I hope you had a good game. I hope you've had a good rest through the break and are ready for the second half of this presentation. Just my confession slide to say this is my thoughts on the issue, and not necessarily representing the views of ISSUP, and I declare that I have no vested interest in provision of this input and what I'm going to say. So that's my confession piece. And again, just to quickly go back to what I've tried to offer through the whole of this webinar, is to try and look at this issue of how can we communicate more effectively what we're trying to do. I think the whole dilemma of trying to communication is such a crucial issue, and often people don't understand what we're trying to say, and certainly in this field of prevention, it was very hard to try and get people to understand where we come from because of our experience, and it can be very different to theirs. And perhaps football is at least one common language for a lot of people, not everybody, but I hope it does provide something that crosses increasingly the gender barriers, religion, culture. There are people around the world, as we know, in this month, in spite of the issues of the country where it's taking place, who are speaking the language of football. So what did I try to offer in these two halves of our match? I wanted to try and use the analogy of football, to look at the position and role of prevention within drug demand reduction and the drug demand reduction FC. And I was told at the end of the first half that someone asked, or people asked, what FC meant. It's football club. So the drug demand reduction football club, where does prevention fit? And what about the context of prevention and the opposition we face as a prevention football club? And what are the issues that we need to address in how we go about our work as a team and in comprising an effective and achieving team? How do we look at how we go about the game? What are the approaches and tactics that we should use, making sure we avoid relegation? What are the challenges we face? And they're increasingly there, particularly as we try to build evidence-based prevention, and how we therefore need to plan for the season ahead. What are the principles and tactics required as we move forward? And finally, to try and look at how you can take this webinar and put some of the ideas, if you like them, into action as we plan for promotion and our role in the Premier League. This second half focus is really got three key areas. One, within the drug demand reduction football club, to look at, sorry, the first half focus was to really focus on position of prevention, the opposition, and how we avoid relegation. So looking at questionable approaches, who we have to compete against, and where we place prevention in the overall team effort. And I think what I've got here is the wrong presentation, because I think this is the first half. Olivia, can you help me? I don't know how I've got this one. We've got to the stop showing screen. Forgive me if I just try and get back to the appropriate team. How can we do that? Olivia, can you help me on this one?
I've just sent you the presenter controls again. Hopefully you can then share your screen. We can see your slides.
Yeah, but which one? I need now to open up my proper presentation.
Okay, if you click escape, if you click on the slides and then click escape.
On the slide, and okay, and go to escape, and then I can get rid of that. And then how do I insert this? That's webinar first off. Do go, and I'm there, hopefully.
Yeah, we can see it. So if you just put them in full screen again.
Put them in full screen.
A bit further along. to the right. A bit further along. There we go. Oh, missed.
Hang on. I missed it.
I think you've just swiped back to the other side. If you just need to forefinger sort of swipe back to the other desktop.
Hang on. I do apologize for this, ladies and gentlemen.
That's okay. Can you see your Finder again? Can you see your Finder window?
Yeah. Finder.
Yeah. And then if you just open the file again, open the presentation from your files again.
It won't let me find it. Let me go here. Sorry. Let me find here. Football second half. Right. And now I need to go to the bottom and get
Then
there.
along, it's the next one along, a couple along, one more along. Yeah, perfect. There you go.
Okay, thank you. I hope, bear with me. So I was into, there we are, the second half. This is where I was going to focus. Forgive me for that. I'm just going back to the replay rather than the second half. So 3 things I want to focus on: the challenges for the evidence-based prevention, how we plan for the season ahead and look at those challenges. I want to really look at our principles for prevention because they're really important, because they make it show us what the tactics we need to use in how we go about our work. And as I say, I'd like to look at how we can together build the next steps to promotion in the Premier League, and hand the challenge over to you. So what are the challenges that I think we face as a new team? I think we've got to take on board that we need to look at what players we need, what purchases do we need to add to our side, because it perhaps hasn't been performing quite as it might, and there is now a lot of new opposition, and the game has changed. We need to think about the structure of our team if we're going to work, because it needs a structure, it needs an infrastructure, it needs support. And what is that, and what do we need? And we've now in an era where prevention, like football, is both an art and a science. At least I would question, is it an art or is it a science? I think it's a little bit of both now, and we're no longer seeing prevention as just an addition to looking at drugs. It is a prevention science that we need to understand and implement. And we need to think about how we go about scoring more goals and getting some wins, and that needs some thought and planning, which perhaps hasn't gone on in the past. The game has changed. What we see when we look back at football games in the past, the pitches, the crowds, the grounds, and the way it was played, it was very different to what we perhaps need if we're going to succeed in the current season. Football and prevention has become more sophisticated, and very important issues to address. And if we're going to become an effective team, we have to also look at what the evidence as to how that can be achieved, and to take on the experience of people who have worked in the field. And we need to see what is required, and we're beginning to identify what is required, but we also need to remain aware of what the opposition is doing and planning, and how do we keep them from being always one step ahead, which they usually are if we're not careful. So how do we prepare for the season ahead? What are the issues that we need to take on board? What have we learnt if we're going to provide an effective prevention team? Well, as I say, prevention science has arrived. We now talk about prevention in terms of working on an evidence base, which is growing. It's still not sufficient. It needs to be built in terms of knowing what works and is effective in different contexts and cultures and situations. But as we build an evidence base, as we build more sophistication, we need also to think about training and specialisms of people who are the providers of prevention. So the range of issues have to be addressed. What about the quality standards of the work that we undertake in prevention? Work has gone on in that way in terms of the European drug prevention quality standards, and are we aware of that and how to implement them and what they're trying to say about the work we do? Think of the international standards produced by UNODC and how they have played a significant part in helping us to rethink how we build our prevention work. There's 2 examples. There are others that are trying to enrich the evidence base and the science of prevention. We need to think about prevention in terms of healthy behavior and well-being, and not just not doing things. We know that in prevention we've got the concern about building protective and addressing risk factors. Where does that fit in our prevention provision? Personal and social skills and competence was very important for a lot of the work that I did in the 90s. And where does that fit now? And does it still have a part to play in what we develop in our prevention work? And what about environmental prevention? Relatively new concept, but perhaps very important. And even that little illustration at the bottom is trying to show us a little bit of the issues of environmental prevention can have an impact on prevention. And we also need to take on board that it's not just an individual issue, but it's about the context, it's about the opportunities, about social conditions, and what impact do they have on what we say and do in prevention. And we need to think about the settings for provision, because prevention isn't just taking place in one area, in one setting. I'll say a little bit more about that, and the different stakeholders and providers and their needs, and how do we meet them. What are the tools that people need for then implementing? Because we can often talk a lot and say what should be, but then people need support, they need resources, they need tools to help them implement. And we need to ensure we can clarify our objectives. And our objectives may be many and varied. Often the objectives was, can we reduce people using drugs? But maybe there are a lot of objectives on the way if we're going to achieve that one, if that is the appropriate one at the end. So different objectives within the whole scheme of our prevention work. And then what about policy, and how does policy and practice fit together, and how can we affect and change policy to reflect what we're being told about evidence-based professional prevention science, and about advocacy and political understanding and investment and support, which again, fundamental to any team is they've got support beyond the ones that play the game and get out on the pitch. Unless there's something behind them to back them, it won't happen. And so the need for this aspect of advocacy and political understanding, political will, the need for investment and support for our prevention work is fundamental. And then, of course, the structure and systems that will allow us to actually implement what we see as important and necessary in our prevention work. So what I can see in that whole list is a whole range of areas and issues that we need to address if we're going to build our team to be effective and climb the league table. Another question, I think, in prevention increasingly is, do we need specialists in prevention? We have, if you think about legal advice, if you need legal advice, who do you go to? You go to different lawyers that have different specialisms within the concept of being a lawyer, where you get expertise, advice, and help. If you need substance abuse treatment, where would you go? Well, you go for people who are specialists in substance use disorders and who have trained to be competent in how they go about their treatment provision. If you want to become a footballer and be an expert in football, well, we go to the specialists, and it may be to be how to become a player or a manager or a coach or a pundit. There are different expertise areas and different people within the field. What about prevention? Who do we go to when we need help and support in prevention? I'm not sure. There are various people, organizations, but is it a need where we need to look at where do we go with the need for specialist support in helping us build prevention? I'll come back to that. So what about building our prevention stakeholders football club? The stakeholders team, and we think about it as a stakeholders team who have or should have prevention within their remit. And the reality is that most of the people in this team will have prevention alongside a range of other remits and responsibilities and have or need specialist expertise. So who's in our team? Well, I think prevention has got a role for parents, for carers, for family members. They're stakeholders in prevention. What specialism or help do they need? Teachers, schools are often seen as a key area for prevention. What help and support do we give them? Social workers, health workers, doctors, nurses, primary care providers, community leaders, police, religious leaders, media providers, people who are in the workforce, in the HR unit, those who are making laws about issues around substances, those who are involved in planning and the environment and the communities in which we function and live, and the policymakers. We've got quite a lot of stakeholders in prevention that need help, support. Can they all be expected to be specialists in prevention, or what specialist help and support do they need to undertake their role and function as a prevention provider? You may obviously list others in your own communities that are very much a part of what we can provide as a prevention stakeholder. So the team of stakeholders is many and varied, and it's multidisciplinary. And I think that's what makes prevention really quite difficult, because you can train specialists to be treatment specialists, you can train different lawyers to have their specialism, you can even train people involved in the football arena to have their expertise. But within prevention, we've got so many people engaged and involved. And in some way, are we all providers of prevention, or should we be if we're not? So questions we need to ask: which of these stakeholders have been trained in their prevention role for their particular setting? How many have been trained in prevention? Who's provided that training, and what is the specialism that they have in order to provide it? Do they speak with a common voice and a core competency and understanding of prevention? When we talk about prevention, do we often give a mixed message, or have we got a shared understanding of prevention and prevention science? And do they know what and how to offer their stakeholder input to the stakeholders prevention team? Because, as we've said, many stakeholders, many needs. Do we know what we're providing for each member of the team? And what is required for this team to operate effectively? So we're back to training and support. From whom? Where can we get hold of that training? Where can it be accessed for these different stakeholders? How is it funded? And what are the other needs in order to become a member of the league and a member of that team? And we need, just to say that if we can address that, we're in a position with the foundation of an evidence base that we're trying to provide for the stakeholders and supported by, then we can say we've got a team of preventionists, the people who become the players. And so what I'm wanting to suggest to you is that if we look at these issues of how we provide training, support, input for the different stakeholders in prevention, we can begin to have an evidence-based prevention football club. And that club is based on a lot of the work that's gone on in the field and supported by some very important organizations, the MCDDA, the Society for Prevention Research, the EUSPR, INL, ISSUP, ICU, DDR, I've missed the U out, sorry, ITTC, the Colombo Plan, UNODC, and to all the people that have begun to provide both training, curricula, and an input to try and help us address how we can build an evidence-based prevention football club. So what does our team need? It needs training, it needs to be supported, it needs sustainability. And that perhaps is the front line, the attack. How can we ensure that our team is one that's based on training, support, and sustain it? How do we sustain it? Are we in this team providing the quality standards? Are we ensuring that people can access and understand the evidence? And can we help to build the curricula or the programs or resources that people can then use in their practice, having got and understood the evidence and the quality standards, and know that they've had the training and support? And behind that, there's an important area of the defence in terms of the need for the political will, the need for international collaboration to learn from each other internationally as to what we should be doing and whether it's effective or not, and how we can learn and share from each other. And of course, the need for funding. None of the team will operate effectively if it hasn't got financial support. And a backline is that what we provide needs to be accessible. It needs to be supported by professional expertise and experience, and it needs to engage with and ensure there is proper research-based developments and that there's evaluation of what we do. And if we provide these fundamentals in our evidence-based prevention FC, and we provide this for the people who become either the specialists or the providers of prevention, perhaps we're in a way forward in building our team. And of course, we need to profile the cause and make sure the cause is kept alive as being something that's important and necessary, and communicate that effectively. The players, who are the players? Well, I think we've got to make sure that our players have got certain competencies and supported. There need to be people who've got certain expertise and experience. They need to be professional, trying to professionalize our workforce, and they need to receive and help with being trained. They need to be a team player. There's many stakeholders, but they need to understand and what their other stakeholders and the different roles that people can play. Because in our football team, we've got different skills and abilities, and we've got to use those skills and abilities to make our team work effectively. We can't play as a one-man team. We've got to link with the other people in the team to be effective. And of course, that team needs to be committed. The players need to be committed to that cause in how they undertake work in prevention. And that means that those that are playing with our team need to have certain personal qualities. They need to be willing to learn and train. They need to have some core competencies in how they see and view prevention. And we need to also build on their natural abilities, interest and enthusiasm. And again, I suggest if our players have these competencies, these areas within our team, then again, we're in a position to move forward in having an effective team approach to prevention. And again, the cause has to underpin what we're all doing. So what about the preventionist, the person who's got the specialist role or been trained to be a specialist? They can only function as even with the best footballers with the necessary infrastructure and support. And what does that mean? What sort of things should we be providing as we move forward in our prevention approach in the future? Well, it needs management. A good football team always looks for a good manager, and that management needs to give oversight and support, to provide direction and leadership, and that needs to come either from individuals, or from an organisation. In some cases, maybe a government, maybe an individual, maybe a particular cause, a charity, or whatever. But management of the team is important. It needs coaches, it needs trainers, people who are mentors who keep access to training and professional development. Our team won't be effective unless it can have access to these important needs for being coached and trained. And it needs support. It needs support from family, friends, colleagues, community, society, government. There has to be a groundswell of public support for what we're doing is important, and that people get that backing. It needs a ground. It's no good having a team if it's got nowhere to play. So it needs to be able to work with those who can be the grounds for prevention, and allow people to apply prevention, be it in the workplace, be it in the school, be it in the community. We have to ensure there is a place to function and people are willing to provide that. There has to be opportunity for people to be picked and play, and perhaps one of the reasons is our preventionists aren't functioning is because there aren't the jobs for those people there. There's no particular role provided for people who have got that expertise, and there has to be the opportunity somewhere for people to play their role in prevention. And of course, as always, bottom line, we need money. We need money for the players. We need money for the club. We need money for the preventionists who are undertaking their role. We can't get out of it. So much can be given and is given voluntarily, but there is a financial aspect for what people try to do in this field as much as anything else. And it needs committed ownership, and this is often the role of the government and other relevant stakeholders. They need to be committed. There has to be a political will to say this area is important and this needs to be supported. And we need to avoid mixed messages. I spent my life where I've found so many people saying prevention is really fundamental to what we should be doing. Prevention is much better than cure. It's cheaper than cure. And then you look at what investment is made into prevention, what money is given to it, what time and support is given to it, and there's a different message. And we even find very different mixed messages about the actual substances which they say we should be addressing. So if one thinks of the message and about alcohol, if one listens to what's on the media, what is shown or what is said or what is advertised, it's often very different to the message that we hear when we say we need to address the issue of substance use and the issues that it can cause. So these are the things that, as with any football team, we need to address. We need to address in our work in prevention. I want to end with 6 slides that are a little bit wordy, but are trying to just summarize what I see and offer as our principles for prevention, and how we can create a team that's playing with a belief and with a purpose. And I would like you just to think about them, see if they make sense or how you would adjust them and refine them. But my proposition is to say that substance use prevention is concerned with helping people avoid the harms that can ensue for the user, friends, family, community, and society generally from the use of drugs. And as I stress there, it's about avoiding the harms that can be not just to the drug user, the substance user, but to the broader society, family, friends, within that person's issue around substances. It aims to offer a positive outcome of health and well-being and a lifestyle that respects the dignity of the individual and opportunities to achieve. And I say that in the sense that often we've focused on the individual in terms of making them make positive choices for health and well-being, rather than just don't do drugs. It's got the positive side, but it's also taken on board that we've got to give those people opportunities and to live with a sense of dignity. And the way to achieve this, I'm suggesting, is with a focus on education and other appropriate inputs and evidence-based contributions. So would you give those ticks or not? They could be modified and adjusted, certainly, but basic premises for me. And if we accept that, therefore, I'm suggesting that our prevention inputs don't want people to be harmed from using drugs. I think we'd all agree with that. But we do want the health and well-being of people to be one of the major outcomes of our efforts. We want to delay the onset of use of potentially harmful and illegal substance use by young people. We may never stop all people using substances, and we never want to achieve that. But we do perhaps need to address how we particularly need to address young people and their substance use. We think of issues around brain development and the general development of young people, and trying to avoid their involvement with substances is a particular target. We should ensure that our prevention efforts and inputs have no negative effects on those we target. As I suggested in the first half, sometimes in the past one could argue, and even the evidence would show, that our efforts may have had the worse outcome that caused more harm than good, and that is something we need to ensure doesn't happen. And it must help people from being harmed from the use of potential harmful legal and illegal substances. And again, we've always lived over the 40 years, and certainly in governments where, and even in organisations where we've had to make the case that we can't just separate legal from illegal substances, but we're looking at a whole range of substance and substance use, some which might be beneficial, some which be harmful, some more harmful than others, etc. So it's a range of substances. And that within our efforts, we must not only try to get people to stop their engagement with harmful use of substances, but promote the respect for self and others and a concern for human rights and responsibilities. And I think that respect for self and others is quite important. Increasingly, we are accepting, and the whole area of prevention should start at a very early age for young people, and that is perhaps often about learning to respect self, learning to respect other people, and how we treat ourselves and treat our bodies and treat each other. We don't always have to mention drugs. And we have to encourage behaviours that are health and well-being promoting and free from the harm that drugs can cause. So if we're going to achieve that, I am suggesting then we should make sure we use an evidence-based approach in our prevention work, and we've got to obviously build that evidence base. We are now increasingly getting some evidence base, but certainly needs to be extended in terms of what we know about what works in different places, contexts, cultures, backgrounds, traditions. But that the evidence base respects and promotes the health, well-being, welfare, dignity and rights of people who are the targets of our prevention work, and it should aim to help and try to ensure those people avoid the harm that these substances can cause. So they need to respect and take into account the culture where prevention is undertaken, and I think that often throws out the challenge of what we develop in one country, often by very well-intended and specialist people working in settings of, let's say, the Western culture, how far that can have its impact in different cultures and settings, and how we can broaden and check out that what works in one country and setting can work in another. So we need to offer the appropriate inputs to address prevention provision for different settings and for different target groups, schools, family, community, workplace. Are we providing help and support, the provision in those different settings and for different groups? And I'm not sure if we've got as much as we would like, but there is a different focus and need for the fact that we are addressing so many stakeholders and their role. We need to look at the inputs that we provide, particularly to young people, and we often now look at our input for young people in 3 categories. The universal targeting for the whole population, selective targeting particularly the vulnerable or risk groups or at-risk groups, and the indicated, those who are becoming involved with substance use. So we need to look at what we are providing and whether it has a focus and what its target group is, and clarity in terms of our objectives. And we need to ensure that the methodology and communication of prevention reflects the evidence base and the necessary concern for the people being targeted. And again, for me, that's always been important, because it's not only what we do in our prevention work, it's how we do it. Back to the communication and the approach that allows people to learn and take on board these issues rather than to be told what they should or should not do. Two more to go. So as I've just said, consider that effective prevention is not only about content, it's about how we do things. How do we achieve our objectives? We need to give particular attention to how we use the media, including social media, and our messaging and terminology, because terminology in the whole area of substance use is a major issue. And certainly at the moment, with stigma is a very much a common use of concern about how substance use and stigma often go together, and the whole area of language and how we refer to people who have substance use disorders or issues, and often the word about problems. Language is very important, and we need to address that. And certainly social media, for me, I have to say, is a mystery, in the sense of I fear what social media can do in this area. I hope we can see what positive things it can do, but I think a lot of work will need to go into that. Avoid approaches that can cause harm, impact negatively. Mentioned that previously. And avoid the use of scare tactics, using inappropriate images or language, stigmatization, or inappropriate reference to those who suffer from a substance use disorder. Again, it's all about what language you use, what examples we use, what people we use in how we go about our prevention work. And perhaps trying to avoid offering solutions to drug use that are unlikely to work, such as just say no. Let's be realistic in what we are able and want to achieve, and consider the value and truth of messages that can be unhelpful in our prevention efforts, such as a drug-free world. Again, it all depends what you mean by drug, but a world without drugs in terms of medication and that, for example, would be impossible and not something we would want to see, because medication has brought so much in terms of help and support and health, but used wrongly and obtained, and it can be really detrimental. So we need to think again about carefully what we say in our messages, and whether that's a real true message that young people can see through if we're saying we want a drug-free world. Let's be honest and realistic. And finally, I'm suggesting substance use prevention is about people. It's not about drugs. It's how we can address the issue of helping people. It's not about problems, but helping promote a positive lifestyle. As prevention providers, we need to be honest, respectful, sensitive to others, and maintain a positive focus on our objective of helping people avoid the use of substances that can cause harm to the user, friends, family, etc. So try and see it as something positive, trying to see it as something that's focused on people and the society in which we're trying to develop. So some challenges for the season ahead. And these are really the challenges I put to you as you think about your work and how you develop prevention in your remit and your role, often as a provider or trainer, as someone who is interested enough to give time to listen to this. So is Substance Use Prevention Football Club, or should we have a health or well-being promotion football club? One question. How much should we put the focus on the substances? How much on the health and well-being? Should we look at the outcome that we focus on those who are providing, or the infrastructure that is available to them? I'm sure we can say both, but where should our priority? Is it that we need more focus on the players and their abilities, or more on building an infrastructure in which they can operate? And again, is there focus on the individual and their health and choices and behavior, or is it, or equally should it be, on the environment in which they are asked to function? We have the building personal and social skills and competencies, healthy behavior, decision making, risk and protective factors, responsible choices, FC. I don't think that's the name we would call the team, by the way, but it's often seen as versus the opportunity, employment, status, housing, upbringing, social circumstances, FC. Well, again, is it either or is it a matter of how do we put those both together into a nice team name in how we go about our prevention effort that actually looks at the individual, but also looks at the society and community in which they have to function? Should we pay more attention to individual substances rather than amalgamate them as drugs or substances? Is there a need to split them and say there's a one law for alcohol and how we review it, how we view it, and what we do about it, compared to, be it cocaine or heroin, or where does cannabis fit, and how far should we be looking at things from a substance perspective? Or do we, I say, forget the focus on the substances and do more as a how do we promote the health and well-being lobby, and look at all a range of other addictive behaviors, and gambling is one that comes to mind as an increasing issue, and is the way we address those behaviors, be it gambling, the same as how we approach substance use? And so do we need a new team and rename it? Do we need preventionists, for specialists in prevention and or substance use prevention? And again, all I'm wrestling with myself is, should everyone who's got a prevention role be a specialist? Because it's easy to have a specialist for treatment, but it's not the same for prevention, because so many are involved in prevention. So is the preventionist someone who helps to support, train, oversee, help all those who have a role in prevention? I think we need to think out how we help build a specialist for prevention. And if we do need those people, yes, how do we achieve it? What is necessary in terms of the training and setting up their role in helping others to become preventionists? So in a sense, I'm leaving it for you now to devise your team for action. What do you see as the priorities in as you approach the team ahead, knowing we can't do everything and there are going to be always more questions than answers? But if you're going to have an attack that works in your prevention efforts, what's going to be there? And if our midfield, as we said at the beginning of the first half, is about maintenance and it's action oriented, it works across the field, it's essential, what would you have in the midfield? And what is in the defence? What are the basic needs that we need to address? And how do we get the fans and the support to make it happen as you build your team for action? So I think we always get to the situation where when we hear people speak, we either say that was rubbish, and I hope that won't be the case. But if you at least use the word interesting, or I hope so, but ask the question, what value? And I think there's little value without action. I just ask you to consider the following. You might want to send your action plan team. I'd love to hear what your action plan teams are and where you think they need some help and support. What are the questions, comments, concerns if we're going to build our effective team and win the league? Because perhaps between us we can make a team that works. And I even would be happy to receive it from non-football speakers or non-soccer speakers if you're from the other side of the water. You may even have a better analogy than football. And tongue-in-cheek, I think I'd be classified as a liberal in favour of people having and making their own choices. I try to implement this in bringing up my three sons a long time ago, and the only time it didn't work that way is when I knew they had to support my football team, and it worked. So is enlightened despotism the way forward? Perhaps we should be. No, not really. But seriously, I want to thank you. I'd like to thank you for your patience and bearing with my attempts at scoring a prevention goal. I hope at least it's asked you to think about the approaches and principles and objectives and challenges as we move forward to build a professional, evidence-based prevention approach to our work. And for those of you who come from a UK background, to end this session, I'll just remember what was said in 1966 when England won the World Cup, and the famous phrase was said at the end as the fourth goal went in, "They think it's all over. It is now." Thank you for your time and for listening. I'd love to hear your questions and feedback.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was very, very involving and engaging. And also for me, I'm not a football player, of course, but I'm not so professionalized. I don't know the football words very well, but what I got from your presentation really is that you made easy, very complex concepts. And using the football words, I think it was good to really understand in a better way also the complexity of the field that you were talking about. So I'm sure that also you did make it easier. Our attendees, our participants did also get the complexity of prevention and how difficult it is to really set up a good football team, a good prevention team. So just a comment, then we will open to the questions. But really, what Jeff has presented in the first half and now in the second half really does show the development of the field. Remember, in the first half, he also recalled that today the approach to prevention was just say no. And the main aspect to focus on was the drug, to focus on drugs. And through Jeff's presentation, we have understood how the focus is not on drugs, but it is on the healthy development of an individual and of communities. So we have had really a big shift into what was the beginning of prevention, when just say no was considered the best thing we could do to really in some way prevent the use of drugs. Today we know this is not enough. Today we know that offering information can also be harmful. So the approach that Jeff did present focused on the healthy development of individuals. So prevention is not just about drugs. it is about having into our purposes the importance of the healthy development of individuals and communities. So thank you very much, Jeff, for setting the framework. I think this is the best way to start on thinking about prevention. This is the right framework also from my perspective, because it really helps to play a good game within this framework, and also to have the objectives very clear, where we want to go, to have in mind the beliefs and the purposes. So now it's up to our participants to ask questions, to deepen aspects that maybe you would like to tackle, all of you. So please send your questions to Jeff, and I will be happy to address them to him. You can write in the question panel. For now, just a few information. We had about 140 attendees, and people are appreciating the understanding of these complex health problems that you offered, Jeff. And many of them would like to have the slides to deepen in a more significant way all the concepts that you have showed and presented. Many felicitaciones to Jeff. And this is up to now. Okay, people saying that you understand pretty well football and prevention. And many people are saying thank you for this talk. Hello from the Philippines. So maybe I will start with a question, Jeff, a question that comes from your previous talk that was left unanswered. So the question was, in the midfield where the schools are, currently, what are the main challenges that have been detected, and what strategy has worked best?
Okay, Raquel, thank you. And thank you for those kind words. And thank you for the people that have given their time to be here. Yeah, I noted that question after the first session, and I think my response was, well, there's the need for another webinar, because I think schools are often seen as a particular challenge for how we should go about our prevention work and have a particular function and role in what we do in prevention. But there, again, it's nothing is simple. There's so many dimensions if we're going to be effective in our school provision, and many of those are not just connected with the resources that we use. It involves also the teachers that teach it, and the training and support that they get from the management of the school, that the issue is seen as important and necessary. Many of you will remember that schools said they wouldn't address substance use prevention because it would indicate that they've got a problem. And it was only when people realized that if you didn't address the problem, that was the problem with the school, that there was hiding its head in the sand, because all schools potentially have a problem. And so it's about management support, it's about time given to the subject, it's about the ethos of the school, it's about how the teachers are trained and go about their provision. It's looking at the different needs of different groups and the different age groups. It's about how do you work it into a crowded curriculum where there are so many demands on teachers and schools. So it's how do you involve the parents and the other stakeholders that link with the school and can play a role in supporting the school. So it's a very complex question, I think, to address, because I think a lot of schools felt the answer was, well, let's get the speaker in to come and give a talk in assembly, or let's get the ex-user in to come and give a talk, and that will solve the problem, or we'll use this curriculum for 5 sessions and expect it to work without looking at the whole broad context and environment in which you provide your prevention work in the school setting. So I can't sadly answer it in 2-3 minutes, but I do think it deserves a lot of attention and thought of people who are both helping and supporting the school as well as the school itself. And it is a sophisticated and complex issue that needs to be addressed if we're going to expect to be effective in what we do in schools. Raquel, you may, from your own experience, have something to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Yes, I was thinking that based on the international standards on drug use prevention, what they tell us is that, especially in schools, what seems really to work is to keep into account 3 main ingredients. So the school climate, the school policies, and the curriculum. So these 3 things together and the intersection, if we see them like 3 circles, the intersection of these 3 aspects really makes the best of school-based prevention. So it means in some way that it is so important to have in place some policies about drug use, for example, in the school. And these policies must be clear and written and must be disseminated within all the stakeholders and the students in that school. So we see that this really helps. Policies, for example, not just about substance use, but also strategies for helping to retain students at school. These are policies also that are so important to really make the best from the students' attendance at school. So the policies, the climate we have in a school that is made of many, many ingredients, the way, the policies, of course, but the behaviors, the approach that teachers have to each other and with the students, the behaviors among the students. So the climate that you can experience when you get into a school, you just can feel what kind of climate is in that running in that particular school. And then the curriculum. So the curriculum is made, of course, of many topics, of many matters, and prevention is not just a topic, but it should be spread all over the curriculum. So it's not just about having 1 hour, for example, of life skills, but it is using the life skills in each subject, in each discipline. So the curriculum is important. These 3 ingredients, the international standards say, that are really important aspects to make the best from school-based prevention interventions. Okay, then there was another question, a consideration, Jeff, about a participant saying that, of course, prevention is better than cure. And he was reflecting and stating that there should be a major focus on the etiology of substance use disorders. So do you have anything to say about this?
Other than to agree, I think that's it's very important that we do look at how the whole area of prevention should be, reflect on how it's built from the past and how we can build it into the future and the situation in which we address it and who should be involved in that. So I can only again concur that this is a very important aspect of what we should be going about in our prevention science work. And I think it's interesting that that is one area that's been identified within I think the development of prevention science, that we need to consider that in the work that we do. And again, you may want to add to that, Raquel, knowing that issue much
Yeah,
less.
well, just to add, yes, I agree with this participant that really etiology of substance use disorder is important also for prevention, because it does in some way give us the opportunity to understand where this phenomena starts. And again, the international standards really show us the complexity of the etiology, and it underlines how we have to consider the personal, let's say, the personal aspects. So the physiology, the personality traits of a single individual. Then we have to also consider the micro level environment and the macro level environment. So micro, so family, schools and workplace have a major impact on the individual. So we have to also look at the etiology of substance use disorder coming from those environments. And so the macro level, so the environment, the community, the society, media have a major impact too. So the intersection and the link between the personal traits, the micro and macro level aspects, in some way all together interact and really have the result and gives us in some way the result of our behavior, of developing certain attitudes and beliefs. So I agree with the importance of really focusing on the etiology model, because it can really help us tackle all the different aspects that in some way are causes of the use of substances. And another question for you, Jeff. So there was, how can you, no, this we already have seen. There was another one. Here is the question. My question is, where to kill drugs? If it is freely produced and sold, how can we prevent drugs?
Yeah, and I think that's the dilemma of the mixed messages, and the particularly where we cross the barrier between legal and illegal substances, because as you know, and we perhaps the biggest substance use issue for particularly for young people is that of alcohol. Yet it's legally available, it's used, it's acceptable, it's promoted, and is seen an acceptable drug of choice. And maybe it is, and that's appropriate. So it's, what do we want from our prevention with respect to alcohol? And is it about no use from as a young child, or what are the questions is how we raise people to live with alcohol in their communities, because it seems unlikely that it will ever disappear. And do we want prohibition? So it's about how can we approach the issue again from the point of view of how do we reduce, minimize, avoid the harm that different substances can cause, particularly those which are accepted and socially available and used. And I think that's the challenge. And to some extent, we've been successful in some areas, thinking of don't drink and drive, and that has seemed to have had an effect, and looked at ways in which we can address those sort of issues. But I think it's about giving a consistent message of how can we prevent the harm that these substances can cause if used inappropriately, the harm that they can bring to you, and how do we deal with that in terms of our own views about the alcohol related or other substance use related behavior. I know there is going to be, I'm sure there is a debate, for example, of which is the most dangerous drug. Is it cannabis or is it alcohol? And that debate is often around. And on what basis do you make that decision? And what is the most harmful? And what is So what is our message going to be on those substances? Well, one's legal and one's illegal. That's an easy way out in a sense. But what is the message that we want to give in terms of educating people to use or not use, in terms of the message we want our society to give, and to help those who are the providers of those messages, the parents, the teachers, those in the workplace? How can we help them give an appropriate message that helps people to address the harms that a substance like alcohol can give and provide?
Yeah. And another question. Hi, Jeff. For parents, is there research on which age or how early the best time is to teach their child about prevention?
I think there is research that says as soon as the youngest we start, the better we're more likely we're to have an impact. But I think what I was trying to suggest, and I welcome others' views on this, it's a matter of we need to go about it from a very early age, and as parents we're always starting out from the beginning to help children live healthily, eat healthily, drink healthily, protect their own bodies, learning to respect themselves, learning to respect others, be careful of what they take into their bodies, learn about medicines and safety and safe use. So there's a whole range of different messages we give about how we can promote our behavior, our attitudes, the way we relate with people, the way we relate with our own bodies and use our own bodies, that can be given implicitly and explicitly from a very early age. And we can gradually try to formalize that in where we provide at different educational settings. And it may not mean we're talking about drugs, but we're talking about safety, we're talking about care and respect and promoting our health, and that's the message that we would want to give. So I think you can't start too soon, and I think that is the message, that the sooner we can start giving those messages, the better, less likely that people will then resort to getting involved in harmful use of substances.
Yeah, the only thing I would like to add, Jeff, is that sometimes we talk about prevention as a socialization process. So from this point of view, I think, as Jeff has said, it's never too early. I mean, socialization starts within the womb, before the child is born. And that's so true also really for substance use prevention, because it depends really on how the mother feels and how the baby inside feels. So if we consider prevention as a socialization, really this really starts right away as soon as we get into this world. And as Jeff has said, it's about much more about education. It's about safe and healthy development. So maybe we don't have to think it as drug prevention. We have to think it really about education and family bonding, especially at the beginning. So if we consider prevention from this point of view, we can also consider prevention as something that should be normalized. So it is part of the everyday life. It is part of our way of behaving, of educating, of bonding with somebody. So I really think this is the approach, because otherwise we keep on saying drug prevention and we keep on thinking that it's just about drugs, but really what seems to work, what shows to work, is really building the person in its way of being critical about things, being able to cope with the life adversities. It's more really about being able to live in this world and coping with all the different threats that the world offers. So it's not just drugs, it can also be, you know, harmful sex, for example. So I think that prevention is, if we really start, as Jeff said at the beginning, it does avoid many other things, not just drugs, but also early pregnancies, for example, or sexual infections. So it is more about education and health promotion, I think.
And Raquel, if I just add, I think that we also need to think of the responsibility for that early learning or education is not just about that individual, about the context and environment in which they function, and therefore the responsibility not only of the parents, but those that have responsibility for our young people in providing an environment where people can grow and function safely and healthily, and that poses questions on people outside the role of parents in what they're doing to ensure that that environment is conducive to a healthy development of a young person.
Yeah. And there's another question, a reflection. In light of the many government-based programs that are funded by them, it is difficult when that government changes or when the representatives over substance use disorder change their sense of values and prioritizing of SUD treatment, or often they wish to address a SUD through punitive means and can often withhold funding when those of us in the field do not support punitive means of prevention.
Yeah.
So this was more of a consideration.
But it's the dilemma, isn't it? What happens when you bring a manager in that thinks it should be a kick and rush approach and the high ball downfield, as opposed to just playing a very nice passing game through the field, and the whole team is thrown into disarray. The supporters don't like the difference and the changes and don't know what to do. And it's the same that governments can play such a role in giving consistency of approach and listening, not just to the political needs, but to actually looking to what the expertise is there and the science is saying about how we should go about our prevention work. And it's often sad when people base their policy and their provision on politics rather than on evidence and on specialism and expertise. But that's often the way of politics, and that can often upset the whole impact that our prevention efforts can have.
And another question, what about workplace settings? What preventive approaches seem to work?
Yeah, I don't pretend to be an expert in this, and I know there's lots of good work being developed on the need for having an input in the workplace on how we deal with the issue of substance use and promotion of health and well-being, and both in terms of what the workplace provides and the environment and the ethos in the same way as the school, but also in terms of policies that it has for people that have substance use issues or other related issues, and how we can work with HR departments in terms of helping to people to be aware in the workplace that these things will happen and how they can go about them in a way that's going to be productive both for the company and the workplace as well as for the individual, taking on board that the whole substance use issue costs industry and business a lot of money, and if they put that money into prevention, it actually would end up being that there's a saving. So it is starting to happen, and there are lots of details into how one might and should go about it, but I wouldn't pretend to be the expert. Raquel, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, I would just like to add that as for school settings, also for workplace settings, again, the international standards say that what really seems to work is to keep into account all the different stakeholders of the workplace. So I mean the employers, the employees, the trade unions, all the different people that are in that workplace setting should be involved. And again, as for schools, to make and to have written and clear policies about the use of drugs, but not just the use of drugs, but policies about the workplace setting. So these should be disseminated, written and clear, and renowned by all the employees. So this is something that really shows to work both in school and in workplace settings. And another thing is that drug testing for itself, for example, doesn't seem to work. What seems to work is to embed, if it's the case, this approach into a wider and a broadened approach to prevention and to health promotion. And this is true for all the workplace-based prevention, to embed it in a broader health promotion approach that is already running in that workplace, for example. So this is what the standards tell us about what works. So in some way, it has to be an approach that involves all the people that are part of that setting. And this really makes a diversity and a difference in the effectiveness of prevention interventions in these settings. Okay, and then would you please comment on the importance of the monitoring and evaluation of the interventions?
Yeah, I can comment. I think it's interesting in all other aspects of, not all, but in most other aspects of important developments and issues, there is also always an R&D section, research and development, and a lot of money is put into that, and a lot of money is put into evaluation to see if the money is effectively used and has the impact that people desire. I think sadly, and again, it's often shortage of money, there hasn't been the same investment in research and development, and certainly not in evaluation. I've worked in a lot of countries around the world, and because of the demand to do something practical and to have an impact on the ground, people have done things rather than felt the need to invest in the research side or the evaluation side. That has changed and is changing, but one can understand the need for people to feel we need to do something. That the problem is, how do you get enough money to actually assess the need of what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, and then how to go about it and implement it, and then to put significant resources into then saying, did it work, and what was the impact, and what have we learned, and what are the challenges, and how we can develop. And that costs money, it costs expertise. And so I think it's often about budgets. It's about priorities that people perceive as priorities, but I think we have learned that we can't expect to be effective unless we put the balance between the research, the evaluation, as well as the provision. And I think we need to keep that wide open, except realize that some countries haven't got the money and opportunities to do the sort of research and evaluation that we would like. But there are ways of going about things to actually address those questions that need to be addressed. Otherwise, we just keep throwing and wasting money doing things that are likely to be ineffective.
Yes, I just would like to add to what Jeff was saying about how expensive it is sometimes to have an evaluation. So for this reason, I think we should also rely on registries of evidence-based interventions that can in some way help us bypass this problem, because in the registries we do have interventions that do show to be effective. So in some way we can get inspiration from these interventions that are there and see which are the main characteristics that make an intervention effective. And this can in some way also drive our local interventions. Also we are not able, because we are poor of money, to have an evaluation of each single intervention. So for example, now I have in mind the exchange registry from the European Monitoring Center, for example, or also blueprints from the States. So these are registries that in some way can help professionals to rely on the characteristics of which are the ingredients of evidence-based interventions. And another question, Jeff, is about football players who were infected with drugs and after recovery and drug addiction, can they be included and supported again in the teams they were members of before?
Interesting question. You're putting the analogy into reality now.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one. Do we say an ex-smoker can't take part? Do we say someone who's had an alcohol problem can't recuperate and take part? What do we mean when they say they've been involved with a drug problem as such? I think we have to, again, obviously there's a need to assess individual cases and the reality of the circumstances and where the person's at and the reasons for and what and where they've got to in terms of their rehabilitation and prospects for their life and their ability to play. I don't see that we should reject them becoming a good footballer if they've had a problem that they've managed or in the process of trying to deal with. It's like anyone else with any other sort of illness or problem or addiction, and think of footballers with gambling addiction, and quite a lot of them, I think. And does it mean they can't play for their football team? So I don't think that's a question. I think the problem if we send them as role models to young people and give a message that, you know, they can be a star footballer as well as be a drug user, we have to look at how we address that one and how we communicate the issue when someone's had a drug, a substance use problem, and how we use and how they are, what message we give as the team and what policy we have. But I think football is the workplace, and it's how we deal with it in the workplace of football is the same way, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. So on workplace, what about the entertainment industry? Workers in bars, cruise ships, sex workers, etc., who are more susceptible and have zero intervention?
Yeah, I mean, again, so many challenges, aren't there, of people, but again, one of the issues is about how do we train those people who are involved in those industries to play a role that is going to be appropriate and relevant to achieving the objectives of people not coming to harm from their substance use. And it's about both the employers of these people having an appropriate principled attitude and approach to it, and then helping their staff to also deal with that.
Yeah, and there was one consideration about, I think, probably about my remark on relying on registries. Somebody saying, Fernando, by the way, to take care of fidelity and adaptation of interventions, which I agree. Of course, we can rely on the registries, but then if we reproduce that intervention in our own country, we have to take care of the fidelity in the implementation and also of the cultural adaptation of the intervention. So yes, I agree on this. Probably it was a response to what I said. Okay, so no other questions? I think it's been an amazing webinar, Jeff, and also the interaction with the audience, great, many questions. Very interesting also to share your ideas and my ideas together. We always get very well together. and we have a same approach to prevention, it looks like. So I don't know, I will just hand over to you to say goodbye. And from my side, thank you everybody for attending and for your participation and attention.
Okay, yes, and I just want to thank you, Raquel, for your support and your expertise and moderating the session and giving again so much time to help and support us. Thank you everyone for giving the time. I know you're probably extremely busy people, and to give the time to give some thought to this issue. As I say, always more questions than answers, but if we've got the questions and try to provide the answers, we'll move forward. I'm always wanting to go a step at a time. Perhaps a goal at a time ought to be the thing. If we score at least a few more goals in the season, we're going to get there, and the league table position will improve. So thank you so much for your interest and time. Please feel free to share any questions you have. You have my email address, or you can send it to the information address at ISSUP. And please join ISSUP and be part of our community in addressing substance use and substance use prevention. Thank you again. Thank you, Raquel.
Thank you, Jeff.
Goodbye. Have a good week and see you again, we hope.